Hello there! Today we're going to be making inflatable art, or at least the basics of how you could go about making your own inflatable sculpture. Now this is intended for my own 3D design class. This is going to be their final assignment, and there's going to be the how-to tutorial. But of course, you're welcome to take this, apply it to however you want to work. If you're making your own inflatable sculpture, been wanting to play with your own stuff, or just wanted to try it out just for grins as something to do on these days where we're kind of all stuck inside. So, stay tuned and we're going to go over the details. Now, the details I'm talking about are really going to be boiled down to 3 basic steps. That's 4, so we'll go with 3. So, start by planning. And I do mean plan out your project. Really, what do you want to do? Do some sketches. If that means you're drawing on pen and paper, pencil and paper, however, great. If you're working on a Wacom tablet or some sort of drafting program or Photoshop, however you like to work, that's fine. The main thing is you're just trying to get your ideas out of your head and on the page so you can see what you're doing and you can start seeing where problems might arise. But you're going to be turning those drawings into patterns. And I mean by that is directly like sewing patterns. If you're familiar with those, fantastic, you've got a leg up on this. If you're not, do a web search. Just look some things up. You're just trying to get a mental reference here. The other things, gather your materials. And that's definitely where a sewing pattern or something like that starts coming into play, but you're going to be making your own pattern. Now, the way we're going to be working, you can actually kind of forgo that a little bit and kind of freeform this, but that'll be up to you. See how we do this, and then you can make your own plan. But materials we're going to be using, plastic sheet. Now, I'm talking about anything you have on hand. Plastic drop cloth sheet, like big wide sheet that you'd use to cover furniture if you're painting. Plastic bags, shopping bags of any variety, most any thickness, at least that you would have on hand probably. Different colored shopping bags. Even bubble wrap can work. And that could add a really interesting texture and surface as well. So don't discount those. You'll also need a heat source. Now, these two go together, a heat source and some kind of a knife. I'm going to be using a butter knife. But this is really just because we're going to be heat bonding the pieces of plastic together. Now, you can use packing tape. Masking tape I would not recommend. Scotch tape is clear, but it's not very large. Packing tape would be the best option, or the best alternative option. Also, if you wanted, you could even sew plastic together. As long as it makes a good enough seal. And I say good enough because you're not trying to make a hermetic, completely airtight seal like a Ziploc, blowing up a Ziploc bag and sealing it up. What you're going to be doing is having a constant air source coming into this form, and that's what's going to help keep it inflated. Think of in terms of inflatable holiday decorations for your yard. That's really pretty much spot on what we're going to be doing here. The other things, a candle and butter knife. Like I said, those are going to be your heat sources. I'm going to be using an alcohol lamp. It's basically the same thing. You could use a cigarette lighter. That's going to be really difficult to juggle, but it could work. The other thing is I have butter knife on here. And I mean this by way of I just want a dull strip of metal. If that's what you have, you can use that. A butter knife, a spatula, anything. Anything sharp will not work. You don't want this actually cutting the plastic with the edge of the knife. You're wanting the heat to do that. So you want a dull blade. Another thing that could work is I also have a ceramic knife, and I don't mean that a ceramic kitchen knife. I mean it as a knife for using clay or with clay and ceramics. So any kind of dull rounded blade works better. Anything sharp, you don't want that. But those are basically your materials. After that, you need a air source. Now, I'm going to be using an old hair dryer. You could use a fan if you're using something much larger, or if you have a small like desk fan, that could even work. If you're using a hair dryer, make sure it's on cool. Don't have it on heat. It will probably melt your entire project. So, make certain you're using it on cool air. So those are the basic steps. Let's gather some materials and get started. Now before we get started, I want to go over one of the most important parts. Safety. Now, this is a basic project, But that doesn't mean that there aren't dangers. Mainly, for me at least, and probably you, depending on what your approach is, you're going to be using an open flame. Be careful. Just be careful. What is your open flame? I'm going to be using a alcohol lamp. You might be using a candle. Make sure on that things are going to get hot. You're using a butter knife or whatever have you. That's going to have a hot end. Now the heat will stay mostly local, but make sure you know which side you're grabbing. If you're just using maybe like a piece of metal you happen to have, like a strip, tape off one end. Make it an official handle. If you're using a butter knife or a ceramic knife, some of these have wooden handles, all of that. Be careful where you set it down. Be careful where you're working. If you're just setting it down on the floor, what is this floor? It better not be carpet because you're going to melt the carpet. So with that, clear the area. Double check your area. Where are you working? Are you working out on a floor? If it's going to be a tile floor or something, are you working out in the garage, concrete floor? Great. If you're working outside, obviously things are going to be blowing around, the wind. That's not a good area to work. Especially with this light material, any amount of wind is going to blow your material around. So just take note. Take note of where your heat source is, your flame. Maybe you're using a heat gun, whatever. If you're using whatever material you're using to heat up, meaning like a butter knife or something like that, be cautious. Know which side is the hot side. Don't grab that side. Where you're working, clear the area, especially if you're using something like an alcohol lamp. What if you knock the lamp over? You don't want that alcohol spilling out everywhere. It will catch up, it will burn quickly, and it won't really be immediately a problem, but it might. What if it soaks into the floor? What if it travels toward the old stack of oily rags that should not be in the house whatsoever? Just things like that. Keep that in mind. Be safe, please. All right, let's get started. So let's get a plan together. I did a basic web search for just some reference. Maybe some inflatable sculpture, inflatable yard decorations, anything like that. Kind of came up with a couple of ideas. Gonna start from there. So I did a quick sketch, and I came along with the idea of maybe a wacky wavy handy arm man guy. And I kind of mashed that together with, saw some interesting ideas for making giant tentacles. Why not? Why not? Because if you can't make it a giant inflatable Lovecraftian creature thing, then, well, where's the fun? So I started by doing a quick sketch. I have something of an idea here for a tentacle. I might add some suckers onto it, because what tentacle is complete without some suckers? And I wanted, instead of it just to be a basic tentacle, I really liked the idea for some reason to have a hand at the end of that. So why not, why not? Now, in red here, just to give myself a little bit better idea here, I am including an area of a vent. I want to have an area where air is coming in. Now, this is not going to be a sealed, complete object, meaning if it has a little bit of air loss or anything, that will be fine. Right here, think of this in terms of a balloon. You're going to have a stretched out area where you're going to blow into it, or if you've seen like the big shiny Mylar balloons, that might even be a better reference. That has a big wide tab that then your air will go in and then it'll get sealed, but instead of air getting in and getting sealed, we're going to be using a hair dryer on the end of this. So that's also going to tell me my scale. How big is this? How big is that? Well, I know from scale-wise that means the hairdryer I'm going to be using is this old model, but it needs to be at least this big. So that's going to kind of start to give me a good size reference. If this hairdryer is this large, and I want the tentacle arm, wacky tentacle wavy arm, something about that large, I'm going to get a little bit large with this pretty quick. Ideally, this is probably going to be about at least 2 feet long. That's fine. That's a good reference to go with. You don't want to work too small. Too small gets difficult to work with. Now, that doesn't mean you want to go giant, but you work with what you got. Don't go too small, but don't get so large that it's unwieldy. But big inflatable stuff's kind of fun. All right, this is my idea. Let's go over the materials. So for materials, first things first, what I'm going to use for plastic sheet. What am I going to use for making this? Now I've got a random collection of things. I'm sure everybody's got the obligatory bag full of bags at home. And that'll be actually exactly what you want. Maybe. Depends on your project. I have some old bubble wrap. Try not to pop too many of these, but, you know, these things happen. I have an assortment of old plastic bags. I've tried to smooth these out as best I can. A few of these have some tears in them. That might be a problem, but honestly, I don't think it's going to be as big a problem. These do also have text on them, though. This one's from Shaw's. I got a selection of other ones. This will be an issue because, for me, I don't want this. So what that means is I'm going to have to go through and cut these bags up to avoid the labels. Now, some of these bags are more opaque. This black plastic one, you could turn inside out and you'll never see the label. That works great. Some of these more clear bags, these are from the produce aisles. These can work really well. These still have a little bit of label, but maybe my design is such that as I'm working around this, I will basically just omit that part. The other solution to this would be, I have plastic sheet in a roll. Now, this you get from the hardware store. This is what I was talking about, the stuff that you would use to drape over your couch or whatever if you're going to be doing some sanding or painting in the room. This works great. Now, with all of these, be forewarned, this stuff is really quite thin, but that's not a bad thing. In fact, that's really kind of ideal because that means it won't, even if you make this large, it won't take a really powerful fan to inflate this. If it's lighter, it'll take less air force to do so. Same thing goes if you're choosing to make this piece out of fabric. You don't want to use heavy material. Heavy material requires a more powerful air source. Some people like to work with heavier vinyl sheet, plastic sheet. That can work really well, but you need a much stronger air source of air for that. So for this, instead of that, I'm going to be using this old hair dryer. Now again, make sure you know which of these buttons turns on the hot air. Now, obviously the red one on this one does so, and that's pretty obvious. Make sure you know the difference. Might not even be a bad idea to just tape over that one. I do not want the heat coming on and melting my project. Other stuff I'm going to be using, like I said, I'm going to be using an alcohol lamp. This is a little glass lamp with a wick inside, and you fill it up with denatured alcohol. I'm also going to be using a couple of knives. This is just a butter knife. Ideally, even the more rounded one would work better. This one has a little bit of a sharper edge. I don't know if that's going to work as well. We'll find out. This one is a knife for cutting ceramics, for clay. This has a point or a sharper edge. It's not sharp like a knife. It just has a sharper edge. But it also has this dull back. Actually, the dull back is what I want to use. I don't want a sharp point. I want a slightly wider band. So that'll work great. The other thing you're going to want, some way to mark out your design. Now, a Sharpie would work, or a dry erase would work. Honestly, either of these would work well. The dry erase marker will wipe away. The Sharpie won't. However, the dry erase, even when you wipe it away, it's still going to leave a little bit of a smear. Just like so. Sure, you draw on there, it dries. Like a dry erase, you can wipe it off, but it's still going to leave a pretty good smear. And also on your hands. So, the easiest thing to do to clean that off is using like some rubbing alcohol, again, or denatured, what this lamp uses, or even just some window cleaner would work. Whatever you want to use, that'll wipe it off. But those are the basic tools. This is really simple on tool or material requirement. Alright, that's what we're going to use. Let's figure out how to actually go about this. Now, I'm going to show you two basic methods to start from. On one side, I'm just going to be free-forming this piece. On the other side, I'm going to be prepping some parts. Now, like I said, first off, I want to avoid this label. So that means first, I'm going to have to go through and process these bags. And that means I've got to cut sides away. I can be a little willy-nilly with it. I don't have to be exact with this. I'm just trying to create a flat sheet to work from. If you're trying to do that, honestly, I did this backwards. You should start by cutting the bottom away first. You cut the bottom away, that instantly opens up the entire rest of the piece. Now from here, just like any sewing pattern, you're going to need two sides. If this is smaller, that means you can fold this over. Or if I'm using a large piece of plastic, a large sheet of plastic, I can just fold this over or double this up. Either way, you'll need two sides. With this one, I'm going to draw out a form. With this one, I'm just going to free form it. So, quick form here. Kind of a reference to or a basic reference to my idea here. I want some sort of tentacle. That means it's a cone shape, but it's also got a wave to it. So that just means draw that out. Start on one side. Establish where I want the other side to be. I do want to have this as a vent. Making labels, making notes, always a good idea. So let me see this. That's going to be about large enough for what I want to do. I want to have it kind of balloon out and make a tentacle form. We'll have it go there. Big ol' swoop. Neat. Okay, that's really it. I'll do the same thing on this one. Now I can't use a marker, but that's okay because I'm just going to freeform this and show you how this process works. Alrighty, let's get started. I'm going to be using an alcohol lamp for my heat source. It's got a bunch of wax on it from old investment waxes and such, but that's perfectly fine. And then I'll need some sort of a knife. Again, I have my ceramics knife, and I have this butter knife. Same diff, really. Now, this burns not as hot as a lot of candles and such because it's burning alcohol. But it keeps a nice, steady, stable flame. I don't need these to get glowing hot or anything. I'm just trying to heat them up. Now, when you have your form here, make certain, for one, you have a clean enough area where you're not draping yourself or face over this candle. But I've got my form. I know that the pieces line up on top of one another. And really, just going to move these things around here. I just need a hot enough knife to where what happens is you heat this up and this will perform two functions. It will seal the plastic and cut the plastic. Now I'm not trying to get this glowing hot. This is just hot enough, but it is hot enough to burn you. So that's why I said be careful. Know where the hot spots are. Now I'm using the back side. I'm not actually using the edge. But all I'm doing, I'm using a little bit of speed. I'm not going super fast. I'm just drawing across the plastic. And as I do that, it cuts the plastic, but it also binds it together. It melts it together. So when I say this goes really quick, that's what I mean. You can draw from a form, or you can freeform it. But let's stick with this plan first. Heat it up a little bit. Now, while this is heating, I want you to note, I was testing out a piece. You should test this out first. Don't start immediately on your piece. Practice. Try it out first. You're going to find out how fast you can go, how long the heat will hold in the knife. I'm going to have to pause, reheat it. Start up again. You'll start seeing how fast you want to go. Now, another thing you might note is if the plastic starts to float on top of itself or float away from itself, it's not going to bond. Now you can hold it down a little bit closer, meaning actually hold it closer, find something to hold it down with, and redo it, or you might have touch-up spots that you have to come back and touch up. But that's what I mean by try this out first. I'm making this scale model here just so I can try out my process. Some plastics are going to be thicker. Some plastics will melt easier. Try out different versions. So I'm just cutting that, move this away, and like I said, the heat cuts the plastic, but it also bonds it together. Now I got a few spots that missed, but that's alright. I'll start to see that in a minute. Let me do the other side here. Another thing, plastic will kind of build up on this. So, you're reheating that plastic. So one of the things you might want to make sure of, when I say check your area, choose your area, make sure you got some ventilation. Do not do this in a sealed room. The fumes that this puts off will likely start to become kind of gross. And I don't mean it just stinks, I mean it's real bad for you. It's toxic. Make sure that you've got some ventilation. That's why maybe a garage, if it's available, that might be the ideal solution. Now I started in the middle here just because I wanted to work from that side. I'm right-handed. That worked easier for me. You're left-handed, maybe a different version, or good time to start practicing being ambidextrous. Now look how close my hand is getting to that flame. That's what I mean by be cautious. Where is your hands? Where's the flame? Don't get complacent. You get complacent, that's how you get burned. That's how you start fires. That's how injuries happen. Just be cautious. Now, one of the things about this, I can kind of pick up and start wherever I please. That's not really that important. So, unless you're sewing this together, not really important. I can pick up and start off as I please. Now again, I'm going to start seeing how far I can push this, how long I can keep heat on the knife, that sort. And when I reheat this, I'm not like heating the whole thing. I'm not trying to forge this knife. I'm just heating that end that makes contact. Start to peel this away. Oh, getting there. Check that out. I'll just clean up this end here. Now, there's going to be a few spots I missed. But that's all right. Not bad, eh? All right, I kind of made more of a chicken wing, but that's all right. All right. Let's tackle a couple of those open spots. A little bit of heat. Now, I'm just going back at the very edge. You might have to practice this a few times. Again, that's why I say, don't just think you're going to jump right in and get it in the first go. Practice. Do a little model here. Do a little model work. Do a little practice run. See how and where it's really going to work for you. It really only takes an instant for this to cool back down and be good to go again. So, there we go. Hey, that didn't take much of anything. That sealed it up pretty nicely. All right. Alright, I got a few more holes. So, let's patch these up, and we'll test this out. Okay, my little chicken wing tentacle has pretty much been finished. Now, this is, again, a test piece. Now, a few things I found. There's a couple of holes. That's not the worst thing. But, one other thing I did want to point out. As you're working, your knife is going to get a little gummed up with little bits of plastic. And every time you put it back to the flame, it's going to be melting those plastic pieces directly. So, if you have a wire brush on hand, you should use this on occasion and actually clean those bits off. If you don't, honestly, you could probably just use the old edge of the table and just wipe it off. Now, this is a workbench, so that works a little bit easier for me, but there we are. Keep this knife clean or cleaned enough, and you'll definitely cut down on the whole noxious, stinky fumes part. All right. That part's over. Let's test it. Got my old hairdryer. I did test this before I started, meaning I had to figure out which one of these settings was actually the just cool, because it has a combination setting. Drawback is there's not an airspeed control on this. Now, normally that would be a real problem, except I did find I have a couple of holes in this. So honestly, not the worst thing. Because those holes in my chicken wing tentacle here, well, that's going to let some of this air escape, and that's going to help it all out. So, I made sure, in my planning, that this opening was large enough to slip over the fan. Now for this test, I can just hold this on here. For later on, for your full scale piece, maybe just tape it on here or put a rubber band around. That works fine. But here we go. Turn it on. Inflatable Sculpture. Instant. Now again, it has some holes. That's okay. It has some more work to be done. That's okay too. This is my test piece. But that's the basics. Now I'm going to do a full scale piece just to show everybody. But that's pretty much how this works. And as I said, you can do this freeform also. If you have a pretty basic idea, you can just have that. If you're making it larger, same deal. But I got my chicken wing test. I got my full idea of my wacky wavy arm guy. Let's get started. Stay tuned. Alrighty, so test looks good. I like where that's going. Now it's time to make it big scale. Well, bigger. Again, for the assignment, it's roughly 24-inch cubed, somewhere in that area. That doesn't mean it actually has to be a 24-inch cube, nor does it, but neither should it just be a flat 24-inch thing. Something up in the air, something a little bit. Maybe it has multiple chutes. Again, don't forget, be safe with this. You are going to be using an open source flame, or at least I am. If you're using something else or tape, well then obviously that doesn't matter. But with that, and even so, cutting stuff, just watch your hands and clear the area. That's one of the things that always drives me crazy when I'm trying to work, is if I just have stuff cluttered, just clear the area. You're going to be working a bit larger, work on the floor. Work on the kitchen floor, dining floor, garage if you have one. I don't have one, but I do have the shop. So, let's start scaling this up.